So I'm really happy to be here and happy to have Patrick from LinkedIn. I think he's an especially good example for this segment where we're talking about customer centricity and how you can use crowdsourcing to make an experience more customer centric. So we'll be talking about what Patrick does, how he's using technology to make a LinkedIn experience that much better. And I'm guessing there's not one person in this, anyone not use LinkedIn in the room? I'd be surprised if there were. So I think this is applicable.
That's good.
Applicable to all of you guys as users of LinkedIn to think about how crowdsourcing is actually making your experience better. I do want to set some context. So for those who don't know, Crowdflower is a crowdsourcing platform provider. We provide you a software as a service microtasking platform with access to 5 million workers around the world, as well as your own internal crowd if you so wish. What is a crowdsourcing platform for those who don't know? It is a platform that helps you design jobs, monitor quality, and of course, ultimately pay and rate your workers. So we provide that for you as a turnkey or as a managed service. Crowdflower has several hundred customers, just starting with the beginning of the alphabet. Apple, for example, would be a customer. Bloomberg, Capital One. These are all big enterprises you've probably heard of, and of course, moving up to L, LinkedIn. So with that, I'm going to start asking Patrick and let him do most of the talking here. Tell us a bit about what's new at LinkedIn from a customer standpoint to kick us off that might relate to crowdsourcing.
Sure. Thanks for that, Tim. So, the big vision of LinkedIn, if you look out in the horizon and listen to the executives talk, is to build an economic graph, right? And what that means is we want every professional in the world to be on LinkedIn with a list of their skills and what they're good at, and then a list of every sort of job opportunity also and the skills that you need to have those jobs. And then to create edges between those different nodes and say, all right, here's where you are in your career now, here's where you can go, and help people essentially find their dream job. So that's a fun problem to be involved with because it feels pretty good to work on that every day. In terms of new things, we're focusing a lot on students right now, so we've just launched a big effort to get students onto LinkedIn as sort of a leading edge of new professionals. And really, if you think back, I was a student not that long ago and remember trying to get my first job, and I had no clue what I would do and who to talk to. And so you go to your alumni network, and some people have some profiles there, but they're kind of old. And they're like, 5 or 10 years old. But now on LinkedIn, everyone keeps that up to date. And so helping students find jobs is kind of an exciting new thing we're working on now.
Great. So you have a pretty unique job. You might be the patient zero of crowdsourcing, so to speak. Tell us about what your job is and what is your day-to-day responsibility and what kind of stuff do you do?
Sure, yeah. So I'm LinkedIn's crowdsourcing person, right? And what that really means is when people have crowdsourcing problems, they come and talk to me. And a lot of what I do is not building jobs or doing the crowdsourcing, finding workers and monitoring. It's really just like more conceptual than that. So what's the problem you have to solve and trying to figure out where you plug crowdsourcing into that pipeline. Sort of a bigger picture, we use crowdsourcing almost exclusively for sort of building data products and in combination with machine learning. We heard talking about a hybrid crowd of automation and crowds and experts, and I think we also do that. We own the automation. That's kind of our key IP. But if we want to understand, like if you're a man or a woman based on your LinkedIn profile, because maybe we want to serve different ads to different people, we would train a model, to infer gender from LinkedIn data and different characteristics. So using those types of things, someone will come into you and say, all right, I want to crowdsource this. I don't know how to get my training data. And there are a couple different ways we could go about crowdsourcing that. One would be to just give you a profile and ask you what that person's name is. And that might work. It'll probably work really well if there's a picture, but what if it's a name like Tony, right? Tony can be male, it can be female. In different geographies, it'll have different sort of predominance in terms of gender. So crowdsourcing there might be kind of tricky versus some other ways of doing it where we have, like, you could look at recommendations and say, well, every recommendation has a gender in it. She is really good at this, he is really good at that. And so that would actually be a better place to do it. And then we use crowdsourcing to sort of audit the final product rather than build a bunch of data to train off of. So it's those kinds of trade-offs where do we want to use crowdsourcing? Do we use it at the beginning, in the middle, at the end? Those things are really the problems that I work on day to day.
Great. And just since you touched on it, so when you say hybrid, you mean machine and human and also internal crowd and external crowd. Is that right?
We do, yeah. One of the things we like a lot about Crowdflower is that we can have our internal experts, which usually means the people on the team that are closest to the data, also working in a task. So as we start, we might have the team of 4 or 5 engineers and product managers label a few examples, maybe tens or probably not hundreds. And then we can use those as gold standards or audit sets, or for a number of reasons, use those to complement the external crowd. And then ultimately our goal is automation. We really want to,
Right.
we don't want to do anything manually at scale. The cost curve doesn't
scales
do what it
better.
should.
Yeah, right. Okay, great. So let's talk about specifically the kinds of things you're working on, or the kinds of projects or things people in the audience may have seen on LinkedIn, and explain maybe what they are and what the crowd is doing behind the scenes.
Yeah, so that example of gender is one that we've used. We sort of didn't use crowdsourcing the way we thought we were going to, but it worked a lot better that way. We've done similar things with seniority, so trying to understand where someone is in their career, at what stage. Again, we thought about crowdsourcing. I talked about this a little yesterday, but a director at Crowdflower, a director at Google, and a director at JP Morgan are dramatically different. And so instead, we again use those recommendations where they have a reporting structure. It says A reported to B, so we know that A is senior to B. And so using those, millions of those across every industry that we have on LinkedIn, we're able to build a much better model to rank sort of people within a company. And then again, using crowdsourcing at the end to sort of audit, does this make sense, sanity check. That's one example. Another example, search relevance. We heard about this from Microsoft and what they use at Bing. At LinkedIn, it's a little bit harder because search is so personalized. So if I search for someone and you search for someone, we may or may not get the same person depending on how we're connected. And a great example, there's Kevin Scott, who's the SVP of engineering at LinkedIn, and there's Kevin Scott, who's a SVP of marketing at Home Depot. And so it's kind of hard, actually really hard, to crowdsource that evaluation. And so here's the query. Traditionally, you say, here's a query, here's a product result. Is that a good fit? And you can have a 1 or 10 or 100-page document of relevance. You can't do that as much when there's no abstract concept of relevance. It's dependent on the person, the document, and the query. And so crowdsourcing in that realm gets to be a little bit harder, but a lot more fun also.
Right. And these are the kind of things where there's the scale of the tasks, and then of course there's the intuition of the humans, which is why you need it. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, there's a little bit of talk today about the Turing test line, and we crowdsource up to one point, and then automation handles below that. And a lot of what we do is right around that line. We're really trying to improve our algorithms, and we use crowdsourcing to get there. And it's a great tool that helps us move a lot faster.
Okay. So let's then move on to use a crowdsourcing platform, which is kind of a new idea, really, in technology. Can you talk about why you decided you needed a platform as opposed to, for example, going with a managed service or just writing some code and finding some people? And what is it that made you think we've got to have a platform?
Yeah, so I think the first instinct was to write some code and build it ourselves.
Right.
And it turns out that's actually really hard. You know very well.
Mm-hmm.
I used to work at Crowdflower, full disclosure there, and watched us try to build this thing for years, and we're still trying to build it. And
Yep.
It turns out that's a lot more work than you think. And anyone who's ever worked with software developers knows that, no, it's easy, we'll just build it, it'll be done in 2 to 3 months. And well, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
So we definitely didn't want to build our own. We also didn't want to go down the managed service route for a couple of reasons. One, again, this is something that people have touched on a lot, but you don't necessarily know what's going on in your data until you get in there and do it. And so it's really hard for a managed service to do something that we couldn't do ourselves, arguably better. And then we also didn't want to have to negotiate new contracts every time we wanted a new project, right? Like, we use this for very rapid iteration. We had one a couple weeks ago where we went from idea to execution to completion in under 24 hours. We were mapping speaker profiles to LinkedIn profiles. We did 4,000 or 5,000 of these really quickly, and we got it done in 24 hours. And that's not something that we could do with a managed service, because we'd have to go back and forth and agree on what is quality, what is acceptable, what are the rules, what are this, what are that,
Right.
what does purchasing want to do, what the heck is crowdsourcing anyway.
Right.
So we figured we'd license the software, and it's been working really well for us so far.
So tell us some of the lessons learned. It can't all be champagne and roses, right? There have to have been some pains along the way that you went through. What would you advise people about when they're looking to potentially use a crowdsourcing platform?
Yeah, I think it's good to really think about what you want and what use cases you have. If you have one big use case that you're going to do over and over and over again from now until forever, that might be a time to think about a managed service, because frankly, you can offload all of that. You don't have to build that expertise in-house. You can pay and have it done. On the other hand, if you have a lot of different machine learning teams and projects in flight, that would be a time you might want to think about, what is the total cost of this over the next 2 or 3 years? What would it cost to build it? And then should we just pay for it instead? That's good. A lot of it is also just the intuition of crowdsourcing, and that's hard to develop without getting burned a few times. But there's a couple things that I usually think about. I mean, one is different kinds of workers and classes of workers. And there are like really good workers, and there are sort of confused but instructable workers. And then there are very smart and not as motivated in the way that you would want workers who might be writing a bot or a script to defeat your task. And so thinking about how those different dynamics interplay with each other, and how do you create a task that is really easy and scalable for people who want to do good work, but robust against these kind of like cheating things that occasionally happen in online labor markets.
Okay. And how about staffing? What kind of team? I mean, you're a team of one, I take it, but what types of skills would people need to do this inside, significant enterprise?
Yeah, well, since we partner so much with data science teams, I'm hard-pressed to think of a scenario where you would want to have a crowdsourcing platform if you didn't have a data science and analytics team to partner with it.
Mm-hmm.
As it turns out, those people also have a lot of the skills and intuition that you need to do crowdsourcing. I mean, if you're making predictions, you're writing an algorithm to make a prediction about 100 million documents, you have a good idea of what happens when you're working at data at that scale and how data doesn't behave the way you think it should, especially out at the long tail.
Right.
So those are people that tend to be good at it. There's also now PhDs in crowdsourcing. There's plenty of smart young students who are looking for jobs.
Yeah, that's my joke. So what is a data scientist? It's an analyst from California. Yeah. So last one for me before I throw it open. So obviously there's only one LinkedIn, there's only one Facebook, there's only one Google. How would you think about applying this? I mean, based on your own intuition, experience, and talking to folks here, if you're at a bank or if you're at an insurance company or an advertising agency, do you think this might apply? Can you relate to data scientists you might know in those professions?
Yeah, I don't know. They don't call themselves data scientists, but I know the guys at DST have found a need where they have a problem and it's transcribing documents, and they think crowdsourcing is a great way to do some chunk of that. And they're building models and doing OCR to try and do as much as they can to automate it. Agencies, I think we've heard some agencies here yesterday and today about sentiment analysis. And automated sentiment analysis on text is pretty good, but it's not perfect, and it misses some nuance. So, I mean, the sky's the limit. I think as long as you're dealing with large data problems and you have some moment where you need human judgment or human intuition, there are ways to incorporate crowdsourcing into it, and it's usually not the most expensive part of what you're working on.
And good data means good customer experience, which means more revenue, which applies to a lot of different businesses, presumably, right?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, cool. That's all we have. I'm happy to answer. We have a few minutes left for questions for those who might have them. Yes.
What's the decision criteria between outsourcing versus crowdsourcing? When would you want to do a task in crowdsourcing versus outsourcing? Maybe to both of you.
That sounds like almost a philosophical question. I mean, when we think about crowdsourcing, we're not thinking about cheaper, we're not thinking about higher quality. In my experience, you can almost always find a cheaper offshore solution than what you can do somewhere else. I mean, we're not trying to drive costs down. We want something that's flexible, that's dynamic. And so if we have a task that we need to launch at 11:45 on a Friday night because we have some big push going out on Monday, we don't want to have to go out and contract with someone wherever they might be. We just want to be able to turn something on, get people to come in, and sort of automation where we don't have to know, we're not like managing each worker individually. We have automated processes that can tell who's doing good work, who's not, and getting that data without having to commit to anything up
Yeah,
front.
I would just say variability, I think, is your first consideration. If you have workloads that peak and then drop, crowdsourcing is a great solution because you don't have to onboard those people and then have them sit around or have to get rid of them.
Okay, any more questions?
Great, we're here all
Okay,
day,
thank
so
you.
come find us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Oh.